Our roots begin with Proudhon, the first to call himself an anarchist. He saw that property has a dual nature. Property is theft, when it allows owners to exploit others' labor, yet property is freedom when it guarantees individuals control over their own work and livelihood. This is the core of mutualism, a synthesis of what's valuable in socialism and liberalism. We reject capitalist private property that yields income to owners who reap where they did not sow, but we uphold possession, the right of workers or peasants to own and use land, tools, and shops they personally cultivate. Proudhon favored a society of worker associations, cooperatives, and independent laborers. Each person would retain the full product of their toil. In fact, he called the liberty he pursued the synthesis of communism and property, meaning we balance communal solidarity with individual ownership. Mutualists prize reciprocity and voluntary contract. We believe free individuals can freely exchange goods and services on the basis of equal labor value, without profit, rent, or usury. The ideal is a network of mutual credit banks, cooperatives, and federations of labor, a society of free exchange where no one monopolizes resources or lives off others' work.
We anarcho-communists respect Proudhon's contributions, but we argue he didn't go far enough. History moved beyond his market-oriented vision. Even Bakunin, who initially admired Proudhon, broke from mutualism on key points. He insisted that land and major means of production be held in common, not as individual possessions. Bakunin described his own collectivist anarchism as Proudhonism, taken to its ultimate conclusion, by which he meant he pushed Proudhon's logic to advocate common ownership and distribution based on work. And then came Peter Kropotkin, who went further to reject the wage system entirely and any notion of exchange value. Kropotkin became the leading theorist of anarchist-communism, calling for a society where all wealth is shared and goods are freely distributed from each according to their ability, to each according to their needs. In contrast to mutualists, we don't think balancing between private and collective solves the problem. We want to abolish the very categories of wage labor, market exchange, and private property, except personal items. Proudhon's partial measures left room for inequality to creep back in. He himself was a fierce critic of communism. But we view his market individualism as a half measure that wouldn't eliminate exploitation. Our principle is that true freedom and equality emerge when everything that is part of social production is held in common. That means no buying and selling of one's livelihood. Instead, people cooperate to produce, and everyone has access to what they need by virtue of being part of the community.
But individual freedom is also a crucial anarchist principle. Proudhon feared that communism, even anarchist-communism, could subordinate the individual to the collective. He believed voluntary exchange and private possession are safeguards against new forms of tyranny. Remember, he lived through authoritarian tendencies on the left and right. His slogan, "Anarchy is order without power," meant each person and group should be free to make their own arrangements. Mutualism trusts that free market sans capitalism can coordinate a complex society without top-down control, while also protecting individuals' autonomy. We don't mean capitalist markets, but truly free markets of equals. As Proudhon argued, unequal exchange is the root of exploitation, so a genuine free market must rest on equivalent labor exchange. In a mutualist society, money might exist but likely as a labor note or mutual credit, merely an accounting tool representing work done, not a means for profit. Everyone would have access to interest-free credit from a people's bank, one of Proudhon's proposals, to start their enterprise. With no monopolies, no patents, no rentiers, competition would actually drive prices down to labor cost and eliminate profit. It's a vision of decentralized cooperation, small associations trading freely, federating when needed. This, we believe, achieves the socialist goal of workers' emancipation and preserves liberty.
We anarcho-communists care about liberty every bit as much. We just don't fetishize exchange or small property as the only guarantee of freedom. Kropotkin showed that mutual aid and cooperation are natural and can flourish without markets or states. Our view is that common ownership enhances freedom by removing economic coercion. If everyone has free access to the resources of society, no one is forced to exchange their labor under duress of need. You fear some collective authority controlling individuals, but we reject any authoritarianism too. The commune in anarcho-communism is not a tyrant. It's simply the free association of all who live in a community. Decisions are made directly or via recallable delegates, true democracy, not state hierarchy. And crucially, because no one is accumulating wealth or charging rent, power can't crystallize in an economic elite. Historically, Bakunin's collectivism was a step toward communism. He still allowed distribution by labor value like your system, but wanted production common. Kropotkin then argued even labor-based distribution keeps elements of wage slavery. In his essay The Wage System, he asked, after abolishing private property, How can they sanction the maintenance of the wage system under any form? Paying people in labor notes for hours worked might seem fair, but it means you're still measuring human worth in tokens and forcing transactions. It retains the mindset of exchange and greed. We prefer distribution according to need, which is practical, we argue, in conditions of plenty, or with rational coordination. People will contribute work voluntarily because they understand it's for the common good and their own needs are met. This isn't naive, it's already how families, close-knit groups, and many open-source software communities operate, work and share without keeping tally.
The key phrase you used is, in conditions of plenty. Mutualists contend that scarcity and preferences still have to be managed. Markets freed from capitalism are simply a democratic way to allocate resources. Every trade is like a vote. I worry that without some system of exchange or price, how do we know what is needed, what is scarce, who wants what? You might end up with planning committees or implicit rationing, which can become authoritarian or inefficient. Proudhon and others influenced by him, like the American individualist anarchists, such as Benjamin Tucker, argued that market pricing, if purged of monopoly, can signal true costs and prevent waste or shortages. In a mutualist setup, worker cooperatives and artisans produce for exchange, and prices reflect labor and cost. If something is in high demand, producers see an opportunity, not for profit, but to trade their labor for more of other goods they want. If something is hard to produce, its higher labor cost price signals that consumers should not squander it. This is spontaneous order. You accuse us of retaining wage slavery, but we abolish the slavery part. Under mutualism, every worker is their own boss or an equal partner in a co-op. Earning a wage from oneself isn't the same as earning a wage under a capitalist boss. It simply means people can choose their occupation and be remunerated in proportion to their contribution, if they want to work more or enjoy some bonus. Importantly, no one would be compelled to work excess hours just to survive. With mutual aid and no rent to pay, the baseline living standard would be high. But we think it's fair that if someone works a difficult job longer hours, they can trade their extra labor for more goods if they desire. That incentive can be useful for unpleasant but necessary tasks.
We understand the concern about coordination, but there are alternative models of planning that don't require markets. Anarcho-communists often envision a system of free federations of communes and workplaces. Imagine each commune freely agreeing to share surpluses and request what it lacks through a federative network. Information flows between communities about needs and capacities, basically, horizontal planning. Modern technology, which we'll come to later, makes this even more feasible with instant communication. And don't misrepresent communism as if we'd have some central committee assigning rations. We aim for distributed planning. As for incentives, social and moral incentives can be powerful. If undesirable work must be done, a community can rotate tasks or offer non-monetary rewards, honor, additional leisure, etc. Also, if technology can eliminate drudgery, all the better. We think mutualists still carry an unnecessary hangover of capitalist thinking, that people will only work for material gain. In a supportive community, with basic needs guaranteed, people will work out of a combination of responsibility, passion, and reasonable comfort, rather than sheer survival necessity. Competition, even without profit, can lead to conflict and inequality. We prefer cooperation as the driving principle. And the historical record, by the 1880s anarchist-communism, had overtaken mutualism as the main anarchist school, suggests that many anarchists agreed pure mutual exchange wasn't enough, especially as industrial production grew complex.
It's true, anarcho-communism became influential not least due to Kropotkin's eloquence, but mutualism never disappeared. In fact, many later anarchist projects like syndicalism implicitly use mutualist ideas of worker control and exchange of labor. The difference is syndicalists often saw unions and strikes as the means, but economically, a union-run factory that trades with others isn't far from mutualism. Even today, there's renewed interest in mutualist ideas when people talk about cooperatives, local currencies, time banks, etc. We see these as validating Proudhon's vision in modern form. You claim we cling to a vestige of capitalism, but we see it as clinging to reality. Exchange and personal ownership do matter to people. Forcing full communism might even require social pressure on anyone wanting to be a bit more independent, or trade their share with someone else. That's not freedom to us. A mutualist society would actually allow communist living as one option. For example, a group of people could form a commune internally sharing everything like a kibbutz, but they'd trade fairly with other groups around them who prefer individual remuneration. We'd have a pluralism of arrangements as long as they're voluntary and no capitalist or authority is imposing. Anarcho-communism, in contrast, tends to insist that everyone conform to communal distribution, which ironically could be less voluntary in practice.
Let's drill down on property. We both oppose the capitalist notion of property that allows landlords and capitalists to extract rent, interest, and profit. The contention is over whether any private property, beyond personal use items, should exist. We anarcho-communists say no. All productive property, land, factories, infrastructure, should be held in common by those who use it collectively. Bakunin made this case in the First International. He said that to truly uproot oppression, the earth must belong to no one and its fruits to all. He saw peasants and workers associating to collectively own land and workshops. Under our system, no individual or subset can claim a patch of land or a mill as mine against the community. The community itself is the custodian. If you are a farmer in a commune, you have the right of use of a piece of land and the home you live in, of course. But you can't treat it as your tradable private property to sell or rent out. This way, property as a means of coercion is eliminated. No one can say, "This factory is mine, you others must pay or leave." Instead, workers self-manage workplaces collectively, and the community as a whole ensures resources serve the common good. We don't even like the word property. We talk about usufruct use and common stewardship. The goal is that all belong, so none are slaves to anyone's private title.
Mutualists actually agree with much of that in practice. Proudhon's conception of property was nuanced. He opposed precisely what you describe, absentee ownership and exploitation rights. He wrote, "The proprietor reaps where he has not sown, to condemn those who own and profit without labor." Mutualism says only legitimate property is that which is based on personal occupancy and use. In other words, no absentee landlords, no shareholders who don't work in the enterprise. If you till the land, it's yours as long as you use it. If you leave it fallow or rent it out to someone, it reverts to whoever will actually use it. This use and occupancy tenure effectively socializes property because it voids ownership that isn't tied to labor. The difference is we do allow the individual or the workers' association to own the product of their labor and the immediate means to produce it. So a group of workers who operate a bakery collectively own that bakery in the sense of having exclusive use rights, and they can exchange its bread with others. Anarcho-communism would say the bakery and bread belong to the whole community. It sounds like a small tweak, a coup bakery versus a community bakery, but it has implications. In mutualism, that bakery collective could, for instance, decide how to distribute their bread or with whom to trade, whereas in communism, the distribution is decided by the broader commune. We believe our approach guards against someone freeloading on others' labor. Since each group keeps the fruits of their work, there's a direct fairness. Common property, if truly open to all, can be abused too. What if some take without contributing? Mutual obligations can break down unless you have social enforcement.
In a well-functioning commune, social accountability is the enforcement. Peers see if someone consistently shirks duties. Also, a culture of solidarity can discourage freeloading more effectively than a market incentive does. But let's touch a key point: exchange of products as property. Mutualists want every group to keep, dispose of their product. We communists say, the total product of society is a common treasure. Why? Because production is a collective effort of past and present generations. Take that bakery. The workers didn't create the wheat, the soil, the knowledge of baking, the roads that deliver ingredients. Those are inherited or social contributions. Kropotkin argued in the Conquest of Bread that it's impossible to disentangle individual contributions in modern production. Thus, the only just solution is common ownership of everything. No one owns the bread. The community thanks the bakers by making sure the bakers' needs, housing, food, leisure, are taken care of like everyone else's. In turn, bakers share their bread freely. This eliminates the haggling and bookkeeping of this for that. It's a gift economy at large scale. We know mutualists worry about fairness, but think of how in a family, you don't tally which member consumed more dinner. You assume everyone gives what they can. Maybe one cooks, another washes dishes, and takes what they need. We want to extend that ethos to society. Yes, scale is an issue, but with shared values and federated organization, it's possible. Also, common property prevents reaccumulation of capital by individuals. Under mutualism, it's conceivable that a very skillful or industrious person or collective might start acquiring more and more resources, even if without exploiting labor, just by trade success, and you could end up with disparities or quasi-capitalists who, while paying workers fairly, still manage to have influence and wealth. Communal ownership nips that in the bud. Nobody can accumulate what everyone owns.
If a collective grows because it's productive, that isn't a bad thing in itself as long as they aren't exploiting others. Mutualism's market discipline actually counters accumulation. If a group hoards too much, they'll have excess goods they can't use, and with free competition they can't force others to buy at high prices. Also, without patents or licenses, they can't monopolize a technique. Another collective can replicate successful methods, so power remains diffuse. Meanwhile, by allowing individual and group ownership, Mutualism rewards initiative. People are more likely to innovate or work hard if they directly benefit. It's human nature to take better care of something you feel ownership over. Proudhon saw communism as well-intentioned, but feared it would lead to stagnation or new bureaucracy. Because if everything belongs to everyone, often that means in practice it is run by a committee or a majority vote, and individuals have less scope to try something different. We want a society where, say, if a group of workers has a crazy new idea for making bread, they can just try it and trade it. They don't need permission from the whole commune. Decentralization in mutualism is extreme. Each enterprise or commune is autonomous in property, only federating by choice. That might actually produce a more vibrant, dynamic economy and prevent any central authority. Communism might in theory allow autonomous communes, but if a commune truly allowed private exchange within itself, it wouldn't be communism anymore. So you end up insisting on one mode of property for all, which is a bit less pluralist.
We definitely insist on no private property, because allowing some opens a loophole for domination to re-enter. But within communal ownership, we can have lots of local autonomy. If a certain collective, say a workshop, wants to manage their affairs internally, they can. They just can't exclude the rest of the community from ultimately sharing the product. There's room for experimentation. Different communes might try different formulas of distribution, as long as they adhere to free access. Some might set up commons-based peer production arrangements, like today's open-source communities or Wikipedia, which is effectively anarcho-communist. Contributors freely give labor, the product is free to all. Others might use gift circles. We aren't talking about central planning by the state, but voluntary planning by producers and consumers themselves. In the Spanish Revolution 1936, which anarchists led in some regions, industries and land were collectivized successfully under worker and peasant control. They often abolished money locally. That shows people can organize communal ownership in real life. The revolution faced war and eventual defeat, but during its peak, workers did manage factories and gave out goods according to need or labor in various locales, demonstrating flexibility of anarchist models. Mutualism wasn't really practiced on a wide scale like that. It tends to exist in pockets, co-ops, mutual banks within capitalism, but full mutualist society hasn't been seen. One could argue neither has full anarcho-communism, but we have more large-scale examples of common ownership experiments like early kibbutzim, revolutionary collectives, etc., than of a pure labor note mutualist economy.
Fair point about large experiments, though Proudhon himself attempted to start his People's Bank in 1848, which, had it succeeded, might have launched a mutualist economy in France. Its failure was due to state suppression, not lack of interest. And small-scale mutualism did thrive in 19th century America through networks of mutual credit and cooperative towns, although often limited in scope. In any case, both our ideas have seen only partial trials. Let's talk markets versus moneyless distribution in more concrete terms next, since that's tied to property. Mutualists support markets, but it's crucial to clarify we mean truly free, non-capitalist markets, sometimes called markets without capitalism. In our vision, worker co-ops, collectives, and individuals freely trade their products and services. There's competition, but it's among workers and co-ops. So for example, different collectivized bakeries might each make bread and exchange with others or directly with consumers. Because nobody has a state-backed monopoly or extra privilege, competition will drive everyone to charge only the true cost of their labor. As Proudhon imagined, commerce would tend toward equal exchange, where a product's price reflects only the labor and material that went into it. This market is regulated by social custom and contract. For instance, mutual credit associations could blacklist any business that tries to cheat or reintroduce exploitative practices. Also, mutual aid societies' voluntary associations provide a safety net, so the market doesn't become a harsh struggle for survival. People won't be desperate to underbeat each other to starvation levels because communities ensure basic needs. We basically replace profit-seeking companies with cooperative trade networks. Production is for profit in the sense of earning a livelihood, not for profit as in capital gain. I'll give an image. Envision a huge open-air marketplace where all the sellers are actually the workers themselves, exchanging their wares at fair prices. And all the buyers are also workers who earned their income by producing something. Money might be used as a neutral measure, but it's just a claim on others' labor given in exchange for your own labor. This, we argue, harnesses the efficiency of markets quickly connecting supply and demand, giving choice without the evils of capitalism, since no wage labor exploitation or monopolies. It's a decentralized way to coordinate, much simpler than planning every detail. And it's voluntary, you choose with whom to trade, or not to trade at all if you join a commune internally.
The picture you paint certainly sounds more benign than capitalism's markets. We don't deny it's a big improvement. However, we still see some problems. Markets by their nature fragment society into buyers and sellers, even if those are worker sellers. There's still a risk of inequality emerging. What if certain skills or resources are in short supply? Those who have them can command more in exchange. For instance, say there is a scarce mineral needed for tools. A mutualist mining co-op controlling a rare mine might trade at a very high rate for their product because labor notes represent high labor scarcity. They're not exploiting labor, but they're in a position of advantage. In communism, scarce resources are allocated according to need and sustainability, not who can pay more or work more. Also, markets encourage a kind of mindset of quid pro quo. People start calculating their advantage. This can undermine solidarity. We worry that even a modest inequality over time can snowball. You might start with workers trading equal labor, but some accumulate more labor notes than others by working overtime or via luck in trade, and then they have more influence or comfort. Their kids might get better access, and so on. Class divisions could reappear. Anarcho-communism wants to eliminate the dynamic of accumulation entirely. By taking money out of the equation, we refocus life on cooperation. Instead of businesses responding to price signals, we'd have associations responding to human needs. How to coordinate that? Through voluntary planning bodies, for example. Federations of agriculture, industry and distribution that meet and figure out roughly how much of each good is needed, and adjust production accordingly. This sounds complex, but remember, even in capitalism, massive coordination happens. Corporations plan internally. Supply chains are managed. The difference is we do it openly and democratically, rather than by the fiat of owners or the blind force of competition. Another point, Kropotkin emphasized that when production is abundant, distribution can be free. In modern or future tech conditions, many things can be post-scarcity, like digital goods, or 3D printed basics. Communism is suited to abundance. If something is plentiful and easy to make, why bother exchanging for it at all? Markets become unnecessary friction.
Mutualists don't oppose gift economies for truly abundant goods. If something has zero marginal cost, like digital information, by all means distribute it free. In fact, many mutualists are enthusiastic about open source and commons projects. But for finite goods, we think the most just way to distribute is by labor exchange, or demand-supply negotiation, not by committees, however voluntary. You mentioned the miner co-op scenario. Yes, they'd have a valuable good, but in a mutualist society, high reward for a scarce resource spurs others to find alternatives or new sources, leveling things. If the mine co-op tries to leverage their advantage too far, consumers will seek substitutes or do without, and the CCO gains nothing. If something is truly limited, say only one mine exists, then it's a reality that we can't all have as much as we want. Whether you handle that via price or via communal rationing, someone gets less. We prefer a market mechanism to mediate that because it lets individuals decide how much they need it. If it's expensive in labor notes, only those who really need it will spend on it. In communism, by contrast, you'd have to have a meeting to decide who needs that product most, which can become political or arbitrary. Markets have the virtue of being impersonal in allocation. Also, mutualism doesn't require people to nickel and dime every interaction. It just sets a baseline that if you want something scarce, you contribute equivalently. Within communities, plenty of mutual aid and gifting can and will occur. We aren't against generosity. We simply keep a market framework as a fallback for broader coordination among strangers or different groups. Think of mutualism as combining gift economy at the micro level, friends, neighbors helping each other freely, with market economy at the macro level, distant or large-scale exchanges, all without a state or capitalist class. It's flexible.
A potential flaw in mutualist markets is that they still rely on self-interest to drive allocation, whereas we try to appeal to collective interest and empathy. We believe a liberated society should transcend homo economicus and become more like what you see in communities under hardship. People band together, allocate by need. For example, if a village has one well, they don't auction the water. They agree everyone gets some. Anarcho-communism basically wants to generalize that principle of direct sharing. Now, regarding coordination, yes, high-level voluntary planning is needed, but we're confident it can be done through federations of communes. These federations wouldn't dictate to each worker. They'd aggregate input. In practice, it might look like each local commune compiles a list. We need X units of grain. We can contribute Y units of timber, Z volunteer hours for communal projects, etc. All communes send these to a regional council with mandated, recallable delegates, which sees how to match needs and resources regionally, and so on, scaling up. This is bottom-up planning. It worked to an extent in Spain 1936, They had federations of agriculture, industry, transport coordinating without a state. Was it perfect? No. But neither are markets. Markets leave some needs unmet if you lack the note to pay.
We're touching on a classic debate, distributed coordination via exchange versus explicit coordination via councils. To avoid going in circles, let's acknowledge each system has to solve the puzzle of matching resources with uses. Mutualists lean on spontaneous dynamic adjustment, people adjusting their trades, prices, and production based on feedback, and communists lean on deliberate cooperative adjustment, people communicating needs and plans. It might be that a future society blends both in different sectors. For instance, some anarcho-communists envision free communes but with some markets at the edges for intercommunal trade of surpluses maybe, though purists would object. Likewise, some mutualists are okay with certain commons that aren't marketized. We have more overlap than it might seem. The passion in this debate comes from wanting to avoid the pitfalls. We mutualists fear bureaucratic or moralistic control, while you communists fear creeping inequality and commodification.
Exactly, and our disagreements, notably, echo the 19th century discourse. Even Proudhon and Bakunin corresponded about this. And later, Kropotkin versus Tucker, a mutualist, debated whether wages or free distribution would be more just. It's good we're hashing it out. Now perhaps we should move from theory to how these ideas meet the modern world, because we're not in 1860 or 1910 anymore. Global capitalism, technology, and new forms of work have changed the landscape. Which system is better suited to current challenges? The world today is very different. We have a globalized economy, immense technological capabilities, and also new forms of enclosure, like intellectual property and surveillance states. How do our ideologies respond? For anarcho-communism, I'd say globalization only heightens the need for communal solutions. Global capitalism has meant giant transnational corporations exploiting labor across borders and shifting resources at will. A mutualist local market system might struggle when facing a globe-spanning supply chain. We argue for global solidarity of communes. In a modern anarcho-communist vision, communes would federate internationally. For example, imagine networks of communes on different continents agreeing to share resources equitably. A sort of worldwide gift economy. This could correct imbalances like global South versus North inequalities by solidarity transfers rather than exploitative trade. Technology, particularly the internet, can facilitate this. We already see hints. The open-source software movement connects contributors globally to produce valuable goods software. Knowledge without markets, a living example of commons-based peer production. Wikipedia is built by volunteers worldwide and given free to humanity. This is anarcho-communism in practice, enabled by digital tech. We believe the digital economy allows many more goods to be produced as public commons software, designs, even potentially medicine formulas with global collaboration. Under communism, a breakthrough in one place is shared everywhere instantly. No patents, no trade secrets. Also, automation is often raised. If robots do a lot of work, how do people get income in a mutualist system? They might not, unless you create a basic income or something. But that's a bit outside classic mutualism. In communism, automation is pure blessing. Machines produce, and people simply take the bounty, needing no wages at all. So I'd argue anarcho-communism is future-oriented. It's poised to handle a high-tech, globally interdependent world by focusing on commons, open collaboration, and distribution by need.
Mutualists do embrace technology and globalization, but in a different way. We see globalization of trade not as inherently bad. What's bad is capitalist globalization, run by corporate profit and protected by state power trade agreements, IMF, etc. In a mutualist scenario, globalization would be replaced by federated localisms. Each region should be mostly self-sufficient in basics to avoid dependency, but they can still trade surpluses freely. Think of decentralized networks rather than one planetary commune. For instance, a cooperative in South America could exchange coffee beans with a textile cooperative in North America via fair mutual trade. No corporations or states involved, just co-op to co-op. Actually, some movements now, like fair trade cooperatives, prefigure this. Though they still use money, they emphasize equitable terms. Mutualists would amplify that. No exchange without equivalence. And if we federate, we can have global mutualist credit systems, perhaps a worldwide mutual bank connecting local credit unions, giving interest-free loans to co-ops anywhere. Technology like blockchain or encrypted distributed ledgers could even implement mutual credit transparently across distances. Some modern mutualists talk about crypto or local currencies to decentralize money. Importantly, mutualism can leverage the power of markets for innovation globally. Imagine countless co-ops competing and collaborating to innovate green technologies or better products. This diversity might outperform a single plan. Regarding intellectual property, mutualists oppose it like all anarchists do, so knowledge is shared. But if someone innovates, they'd get credit and could initially trade their know-how for something. Though they couldn't stop others from copying, they might sell services or improved versions. It's a bit complex, but mutualists favor open source as well. Proudhon himself was a printer and hated patents. On automation, yes, if robots produce plenty, mutualism would evolve. We might reach a point where labor certificates become symbolic because human labor is minimal. At that point, the system could morph into communism naturally. Mutualism doesn't exclude that end state, it just insists on getting there through fair exchange rather than decree. In summary, mutualism can handle globalization by creating an alternative global market of cooperatives and handle technology by democratizing its ownership, machines owned by workers, not capitalists.
The idea of a global network of co-ops trading is nice, but I suspect in practice the richer regions or more efficient co-ops could still end up dominating exchange. Without a strong norm of sharing, global market forces might recreate a core periphery dynamic, like richer co-ops versus poorer co-ops. Our approach would be to freely share technology and resources to uplift all regions, effectively development aid without states. For example, if one region has abundant solar energy, and another has none, the energy-rich commune would gift electricity or infrastructure to the other, rather than permanently trading for something. This prevents dependence or unequal exchange. And on technology ownership, anarcho-communists also demand that automation and AI be commons. Imagine if 3D printers and CNC machines are open source and community owned, then communities everywhere can fabricate goods with minimal cost, making local self-reliance more feasible. That heads toward communism because when costs drop and output is high, charging for goods becomes pointless. We're already seeing trends like makerspaces, fab labs where people freely share designs globally and manufacture locally, a mix of high-tech and commons ethos. This aligns with Kropotkin's vision from fields, factories, and workshops of combining agriculture and industry locally, but sharing knowledge widely. I'd argue mutualism's market might slow down this dissemination since one co-op might want to profit a bit from a design, whereas communism would spread it immediately. Given climate change and global crises, rapid sharing of solutions is critical. That's why I favor the communist approach now more than ever.
We both clearly champion decentralization and horizontal global links, just with different emphasis on exchange versus gift. I'll concede that, as tech reduces scarcity, mutualist society could indeed evolve to be more communistic naturally. We just don't think you can start at full communism in a world where many things are still scarce and people's mindsets have been shaped by millennia of quid pro quo. Mutualism could be a more pragmatic interim that cultivates the conditions for communism. Amusingly, some call this combo communist mutualism. Conversely, maybe you'd argue we should just implement communism from the get-go. That's an open tactical question among anarchists. In the modern global context, perhaps mixtures will emerge. Let's turn to another pressing modern topic, the gig economy, precarious work, and how we deal with that, perhaps via something like platform cooperatives.
One of the biggest issues today is the rise of precarious labor. Short-term, gig, contract work with little security. Globalization and tech, like apps, have enabled companies like Uber, Deliveroo, etc., to treat workers as disposable gig labor. A recent analysis notes that this shift has increased uncertainty for all workers, with young adults especially likely to be underemployed or stuck in low-wage gigs. How would our ideologies fix this? For anarcho-communists, the answer is straightforward: abolish the wage system entirely. No one should have to sell their labor piecemeal to survive. In a communist setup, all those Uber drivers, for instance, would not have to fight for gigs to pay rent. Transportation could be organized as a public utility by a community. Drivers or automated vehicles provide rides as needed, and society ensures drivers have housing, food, etc., regardless of how many rides they did today. Essentially, make all necessities guaranteed rights, so precarious jobs are replaced by stable communal work or volunteerism. However, I recognize that here and now, an immediate step is platform cooperatives. We strongly support workers taking over platforms. If drivers collectively owned a rideshare app, they could democratically set fair conditions, eliminating the capitalist middleman. This is actually a point of agreement between many anarcho-communists and mutualists. Worker self-management. The difference is, a mutualist might want that coup to function as a business in a market, whereas I would hope it moves to free service. But practically, platform co-ops, cooperatively owned digital platforms, are a great transitional form. They embody democratic governance of workplaces, and could ensure workers aren't precarious but rather share in profits and decisions. Also, cooperatives tend to provide better job security. Beyond co-ops, anarcho-communists also advocate unionization of gig workers. Even outside a strict anarchist frame, any direct action that increases workers' control is good. Our long-term aim, though, is to eliminate the situation where a person's survival is tied to selling their labor on an app at all. By decommodifying labor, making it voluntary and communal, precarity disappears. Nobody is unemployed. Everyone is just a member of society contributing in various ways.
We mutualists are completely on board with platform cooperatives and any such worker-controlled enterprise. In fact, mutualism in the modern economy looks like a network of cooperatives, mutual aid societies, and peer-to-peer marketplaces that are owned by users or workers. A platform co-op is exactly the kind of structure we think can outcompete capitalist firms while embodying our principles. For example, a driver-owned Uber alternative could charge riders less and pay drivers more. Because it doesn't extract profit for shareholders, the value stays with those who produce it. This echoes Proudhon's idea that associated labor can eliminate the parasite classes. Mutualists would use market competition to gradually undermine capitalist corporations. If co-ops offer better quality or prices due to not having profit markup, customers will shift to them, and capitalist firms will wither. This is a kind of dual power strategy in economics. As for gig worker precarity, mutualism attacks it on multiple fronts. First, mutual aid networks like modern-day solidarity funds, credit unions, etc., provide gig workers with unemployment support, healthcare, small loans, collectively self-managed safety nets. This reduces the desperation that makes gig workers accept terrible conditions. Second, with mutual banking, workers could get capital to start their own enterprises or co-ops, rather than depending on some platform for a job. Imagine gig workers pooling resources to buy their own vehicles or build their own app. Mutual credit could fund that easily, whereas banks wouldn't. Third, mutualists support unions and syndicates. Contrary to some belief, Proudhon wasn't against workers organizing. In fact, late in life he supported workers' syndicates as a form of mutualism. So mutualists would cheer on gig worker strikes and the creation of cooperatives. However, where we might differ is that we'd keep these cooperatives as participants in a market economy, a socialized market. We wouldn't immediately make rides free, for example, because that coup still needs to maintain vehicles, pay drivers, or drivers pay themselves. But those payments would be fair and collectively decided. Over time, if efficiency grows and costs drop, perhaps prices approach zero. But we'd handle that with maybe a basic income or dividend to members rather than abolishing money overnight. Importantly, mutualism also addresses precarity by emphasizing diversified, local economies. If every community has many small enterprises and co-ops, people have options. You're not at the mercy of one giant employer or platform. You can always form a new co-op with mutual support. This fluidity is something capitalism claims to have entrepreneurship, but actually restricts due to capital barriers. Mutualism truly democratizes entrepreneurship. So, a gig worker in a mutualist society could fairly easily become a worker owner rather than a contractor.
Those are promising strategies. I think where we'd go further is pushing for decommodifying essential services as soon as possible. For instance, instead of just co-op ride-hailing, a commune might decide to provide free public transport with communal funding of vehicles and maintenance, and integrate former gig drivers into a stable workforce with a say in running transit. That way, no one has to worry about affording a ride or meeting a quota of rides to survive. But until we abolish money in markets, co-ops and mutual aid are absolutely vital to alleviate precarity. In fact, you'll find a lot of anarcho-communists working alongside mutualists on things like cooperative development, solidarity economies, commons transitions, etc. Because in the immediate term, these improve workers' lives and build non-capitalist structures. We might justify them as steps toward full communism, whereas you see them as the foundation of the ideal system itself. One more modern phenomenon, platform cooperativism, the movement explicitly advocating cooperative alternatives to gig platforms, is drawing on both socialist and market anarchist ideas. They note that platform co-ops can mix voluntary exchange with democratic ownership, which sounds mutualist, but their ethos of sharing and putting people over profit sounds communist. It's a continuum.
True. Also consider the precariat in general, not just gig workers, people in unstable employment, often with patchwork incomes. Mutualism would empower them via, say, time banking, trading hours of different kinds of work, community currencies, and cooperatives to meet their needs without relying on fickle employers. Anarcho-communism would say just guarantee their needs outright. Sometimes I think of it this way: communism is like providing fish for all for free. Mutualism is like teaching everyone to fish and set up a free market fish exchange. Communists worry some will go hungry in the market. Mutualists worry people will lose initiative if fish are just handed out. It's a philosophical difference, But both of us want no one to be hungry or under duress.
And in modern capitalist society, both approaches, demanding free essentials and building cooperative enterprises, are being tried by activists. For example, the push for things like universal basic income or free healthcare, which anarchists might support as harm reduction, parallels the communist instinct, while the growth of worker co-ops and community gardens parallels the mutualist instinct. A future free society could incorporate aspects of both, but likely one logic will dominate. In the long run, we anarcho-communists argue that money, even mutual money, will become an unnecessary relic. The advances in productivity and the social habits of cooperation will reach a point where keeping accounting of individual shares is more trouble than it's worth. At that stage, we fully phase out any market mechanisms and live by all is for all. Mutualists might never consciously aim to phase out money, they'd keep refining exchange principles. That might be the ultimate point of contention. Do we envision beyond exchange society, or do we see perfected exchange as the end goal?
Nicely put. And indeed, mutualists often imagine a steady-state federation of cooperatives and free traders as the ideal, whereas communists imagine a gift-based federation of communes. Both are stateless, classless societies. Our fight is really over what form freedom takes.
Despite our passionate disagreements, it's clear we share core values of anti-authoritarianism, workers' empowerment, and mutual aid. Both anarcho-communism and mutualism stand against capitalism's injustices and the coercive state. We both want a federation of free communities without hierarchies. We just dispute how those communities handle property and distribution. Anarcho-communists see communal sharing and need-based distribution as the path to true equality and solidarity, fearing that any market element reintroduces competition and inequality. Mutualists see voluntary exchange and individual possession as guarantees of freedom and fairness, fearing that abolishing exchange entirely could stifle personal autonomy or require unwieldy coordination.
Indeed. Our debate has highlighted key contentions, whether money is a useful tool or an obstacle to be removed, whether markets can be truly freed or must be transcended, how to ensure no exploitation while preserving liberty, and how a future economy can harness technology and global cooperation. In examining modern issues like globalization and precarious labor, we found that both ideologies offer critiques and solutions, from platform co-ops to global communes, often complementary.
In practice, anarchists from both currents often work together. One could imagine a post-revolutionary society, where some regions organize more along mutualist lines, others along communist lines, perhaps learning from each other's successes and failures. The beauty of anarchy is that we wouldn't enforce a one-size-fits-all economic model. Experimentation is expected. Of course, I would advocate strongly for the communist approach, confident that it better fulfills the slogan "from each according to ability to each according to need" in today's world. I'd argue it builds a more caring and unified society.
And I would advocate for the mutualist approach, believing it embodies justice in exchange, and the motto "to each the full product of their labor." I'd cite Proudhon that balancing interest through contract and exchange is the route to social harmony, liberty, the mother of order, as he said. Still, I'd rather live in either of our ideal societies than under capitalism or state socialism. Both of our visions are libertarian socialist, in contrast to the authoritarian or exploitative status quo.
Well said. Our debate is polemical, but it's a debate among comrades opposed to oppression.
Exactly. Through such debates, we refine our ideas and keep the anarchist tradition alive and relevant. The conversation between anarcho-communism and mutualism is over a century old, Proudhon versus Kropotkin in a sense, and continues as we face new challenges like climate change, AI, and global supply chains.
Perhaps the future will show which approach adapts better, or maybe a synthesis will emerge.
Either way, we remain united in the belief that a free cooperative society is possible, one without states or capitalists, where people organize themselves for the common good. We just have spirited discussions on how to get there and how to organize once we do. And that free debate, carried out in good faith, is itself a hallmark of the free society we both champion.
Hear, hear. In the end, whether through communal gift or reciprocal exchange, we seek a world where people meet their needs in freedom and equality. The journey to that world will be richer thanks to our frank exchanges today.